Sometimes, the person who changes your life isn't the stranger you meet tomorrow. Sometimes, it's the one you thought you left behind years ago. I always believed memories faded the way old photographs did, their edges softening until the faces became impossible to recognize. I was wrong. Some memories only wait. They stay perfectly still somewhere inside your heart until one ordinary afternoon gives them permission to breathe again. My name is Ethan Carter, and for almost 8 years, Liam Brooks had existed only as a name no one mentioned very often anymore. He was my best friend Noah's older brother, the guy every kid in our neighborhood secretly admired because he seemed fearless without ever trying to prove it. When we were teenagers, he left our small Oregon town to study architecture in Seattle, and after graduation he stayed there, building a career, building a life, while the rest of us slowly grew into adults without realizing how quickly the years were passing. Noah and I still spent nearly every weekend together, just like we always had. We watched football, argued over video games, helped his parents with yard work, and pretended nothing had really changed, even though we were both finishing college and wondering what came next. Liam became one of those stories that belonged to another chapter, someone who existed in old family pictures hanging in the hallway. At least, that's what I kept telling myself. Then one warm Saturday afternoon in early June, Noah texted me 3 simple words. He's coming home. I stared at my phone longer than I should have. My heart reacted before my mind did, beating faster for reasons I refused to examine too closely. It wasn't logical. It had been 8 years. People changed. Memories exaggerated things. Whatever quiet crush I had buried as a 16-year-old should have disappeared long ago. That's what grown-ups were supposed to do. Move on. I grabbed a 6-pack of root beer for Noah and drove the familiar 15 minutes to the Brooks house. The neighborhood looked almost exactly the same. Kids rode bicycles along cracked sidewalks. American flags fluttered from front porches. Someone nearby was grilling burgers. Even though dinner was still hours away, everything felt comfortably ordinary until I noticed the unfamiliar black SUV parked in the driveway. My footsteps slowed without permission. Before I even reached the front porch, the front door opened. Noah stepped outside carrying 2 cardboard boxes, laughing about something over his shoulder. Then another figure appeared behind him, taller than I remembered, broad shoulders beneath a rolled-up blue button-down shirt, light brown hair slightly longer than the clean-cut style he'd worn years ago. He reached forward, effortlessly taking both boxes from Noah as though they weighed almost nothing. For a second, neither of us spoke. Liam looked directly at me, his blue eyes searching my face with quiet curiosity before something almost like recognition softened his expression. Then he smiled. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't cinematic. It was simply warm enough to make 8 years disappear in a single heartbeat. "Ethan," he asked, sounding genuinely surprised. "You've gotten taller." I laughed because it was the only thing my nervous brain could remember how to do. "I kind of had to," I answered. Noah rolled his eyes between us. "Can somebody help me before Mom decides we've been standing here all day?" We all laughed together, and somehow that tiny moment felt strangely familiar, as if life had folded in on itself. But while Noah kept talking about unpacking and family dinners, I couldn't stop thinking about one impossible truth. The boy who had unknowingly become my very first heartbreak had just come home. And for the first time in 8 years, I wasn't sure my heart had ever really let him leave. The Brooks house slipped back into its old rhythm faster than anyone expected, as though Liam had never spent 8 years away. Every morning his father handed him a list of repairs that had accumulated over the years. Every afternoon his mother found another excuse to cook enough food for an army. And every evening Noah insisted that we all eat together because, according to him, family dinners were mandatory whenever his brother was home. Somehow I kept finding reasons to be there. Sometimes I brought over fresh cinnamon rolls from the bakery where I worked on weekends. Other times Noah claimed he needed help moving furniture or organizing the garage, even though he usually spent more time talking than working. Liam was always nearby, sleeves rolled to his elbows, fixing loose cabinet doors, replacing old porch boards, or sketching ideas on a yellow legal pad for the renovation his parents never knew they wanted until he explained it. Watching him work was strangely calming. He approached every problem with quiet patience, measuring twice before making a single cut, smiling whenever his mother interrupted him with questions that had nothing to do with construction. The confidence I remembered from years ago had matured into something steadier, something that made people naturally trust him. One afternoon, Noah disappeared inside to answer a phone call, leaving Liam and me alone in the backyard. We were repainting the weathered fence while golden sunlight filtered through the maple trees. I concentrated far too hard on my paintbrush, hoping he would not notice how unusually quiet I had become. Instead, he dipped his roller into the tray and asked, almost casually, "So, tell me about your life." Noah mostly talks about himself. I laughed. That sounds about right. He grinned. I figured there had to be more to the story. I told him about college, about studying graphic design, about my dream of opening a small creative studio someday, instead of working freelance forever. He listened without checking his phone, without interrupting, asking thoughtful questions that made me feel like my answers actually mattered. When I admitted I still was not sure whether I was talented enough to build the future I imagined, he leaned against the fence and shook his head. "You know what architecture taught me?" he asked. "Nobody believes they are ready. You build anyway." The sentence stayed with me long after the conversation moved on. A few days later, I stopped by with Noah after grocery shopping, only to discover Liam standing in the kitchen attempting to bake blueberry muffins from scratch. Flour covered the counter. One measuring cup had somehow disappeared, and smoke drifted lazily from the oven. His mother laughed so hard she could barely speak, while Liam accepted defeat with surprising good humor. I offered to help, and together we salvaged what we could. The muffins came out uneven, slightly overbaked, and far from perfect, but Liam declared them a success anyway. "Imperfection has character," he said, handing me one while brushing flour from his shirt. I smiled before taking a bite. "You sound like an architect." "Occupational hazard," he replied. By the end of the week, our conversations no longer felt awkward. We joked easily, exchanged recommendations for books and movies, and discovered we both woke up far earlier than Noah ever managed. Yet every time I drove home after spending the day with them, a familiar question settled quietly into the passenger seat beside me. Was I simply reconnecting with someone from my past, or was I walking straight back into feelings I had promised myself would never return? By the second week of June, it became impossible to pretend our conversations were accidental. They happened too often, too naturally, weaving themselves into the ordinary rhythm of each day until I started expecting them without realizing it. If I stopped by in the morning, Liam was usually on the porch with a mug of black coffee, watching the neighborhood slowly wake up. If I came over after lunch, he was outside measuring something for another home improvement project. Somehow we always ended up talking, sometimes for 5 minutes, sometimes for an hour. It felt effortless, but what surprised me most was how familiar it all seemed. One evening, after helping Noah clean out the garage, I wandered into the hallway searching for the bathroom. My eyes landed on an old framed photograph hanging beside the staircase. 3 boys smiled at the camera during a 4th of July barbecue. Noah stood in the middle, missing one of his front teeth. I was beside him, painfully skinny and sunburned. Behind us, one hand resting on each of our shoulders, stood a 17-year-old Liam with the same calm smile he still wore today. I found myself staring longer than I meant to. "Mom refuses to take that picture down," Liam said from behind me. I turned so quickly I almost apologized out of instinct. He stepped beside me, looking at the photograph with quiet amusement. "I remember that day," he said. "You followed Noah around for hours because you wanted to play basketball with us." I laughed softly. That is one way to remember it. The truth stayed safely inside my head. I had followed Noah because wherever Noah went, Liam was usually nearby. I remembered pretending I wanted to learn basketball when all I really wanted was another excuse to spend an afternoon listening to Liam explain every rule with endless patience. I remembered offering to help wash his father's truck just because Liam happened to be holding the garden hose. I remembered volunteering for neighborhood cleanups that I secretly hoped he would attend. Back then I had been too young to understand why being around him made ordinary days feel brighter. I only knew that every goodbye somehow felt longer than it should. "You were always quieter than Noah," Liam continued, smiling at the picture. "But you noticed everything." His words caught me off guard. "You remember that?" He nodded without hesitation. "Of course I do. You were the kid who would sit on the porch sketching instead of running around with everyone else. One Christmas you drew our old golden retriever wearing a Santa hat. My mom kept that drawing for years." I blinked in surprise. I had completely forgotten about that picture. I certainly never imagined he had remembered it. I thought you barely noticed me, I admitted before I could stop myself. Liam looked genuinely puzzled. Ethan, you were Noah's best friend. You practically grew up in this house. He paused, his expression turning thoughtful. Actually, when I first moved to Seattle, Mom would tell me stories about you and Noah every time we talked on the phone. She always mentioned your art projects, your grades, the ridiculous adventures the two of you managed to find. My heart skipped for reasons that felt almost embarrassing. All those years I had convinced myself I had been invisible to him. Yet somehow, across hundreds of miles and nearly a decade apart, my name had still found its way into conversations. Later that night, after I drove home beneath a sky scattered with early summer stars, I opened an old storage box in my closet. Buried beneath college notebooks and ticket stubs was a faded sketchbook from high school. Inside were dozens of unfinished drawings, landscapes, houses, neighborhood streets, and tucked between them all was one careful pencil portrait I had never shown anyone. It was Liam, standing on the Brooks family porch with sunlight across his face. I traced the worn page with my fingertips and realized something that unsettled me more than I wanted to admit. Maybe I had not been the only one carrying pieces of the past all these years. Maybe memories had been quietly waiting for both of us. Summer settled over our little town with the kind of lazy confidence that made every day feel longer than it really was. Mornings smelled like fresh-cut grass, afternoons shimmered beneath clear blue skies, and evenings carried the distant sound of sprinklers and children laughing somewhere down the street. Liam decided that if he was going to stay longer than expected, he might as well help his parents finally renovate the neglected backyard they had been talking about for years. Noah, naturally, volunteered both of us before asking whether I actually had time. I pretended to complain, but the truth was I would have said yes anyway. Over the next several days, the backyard slowly transformed. We replaced loose deck boards, built raised flower beds, repainted old patio furniture, and planted rows of herbs that Liam insisted would be easier for his mother to maintain. It was exhausting work, yet somehow it never felt like a chore. Liam had an easy way of making everyone around him feel useful. He never barked orders or corrected mistakes with frustration. Instead, he explained everything patiently, laughing whenever one of us measured something wrong or accidentally tracked dirt across the freshly cleaned porch. One afternoon, while Noah ran to the hardware store for more screws, Liam and I remained behind to finish assembling a wooden pergola. We worked side by side beneath the warm June sun, occasionally passing tools back and forth without needing many words. After fastening the final support beam, we stepped back together to admire the finished structure. Not bad, Liam said with a satisfied smile. You have a better eye for proportions than you give yourself credit for. I shrugged. I only followed your instructions. He shook his head. No, you noticed things before I pointed them out. That is different. His compliment lingered with me for the rest of the afternoon. Later, while we shared cold lemonade on the porch steps, he asked if I had ever considered combining graphic design with architecture or interior visualization. The suggestion surprised me because I had never mentioned that possibility to anyone. We spent nearly an hour talking about creativity, careers, and the strange fear that came with choosing one path while leaving countless others unexplored. It felt less like advice from someone older and more like a conversation between equals. That realization both comforted and unsettled me. As the days passed, I noticed small details I could no longer ignore. Liam remembered that I preferred iced tea without lemon. He noticed when I seemed distracted before I admitted something was bothering me. Whenever I shared an idea, he listened with the same genuine attention he offered everyone else. Yet somehow it felt different when his focus settled entirely on me. Those moments quietly accumulated until they became impossible to dismiss as simple kindness. Then, almost without warning, I caught myself looking forward to each morning because I knew I might see him. That frightened me more than I wanted to admit. I had promised myself years ago that whatever feelings I once carried belonged safely in the past. Bringing them back now seemed reckless, especially because Liam was Noah's older brother, someone I had admired for nearly half my life. I began wondering whether spending so much time together was a mistake. Maybe I was reading far too much into ordinary conversations and friendly smiles. Maybe I was allowing old emotions to color every interaction. That evening, while everyone else gathered around the dinner table discussing weekend plans, I quietly decided to create a little distance. It seemed like the responsible thing to do. I would stop dropping by so often. I would focus on finishing my summer design portfolio and let life return to normal. Yet as I reached for my car keys after dinner, Liam walked me to the front porch. "You are coming by tomorrow, right?" he asked casually. I hesitated for only a second before answering. "I actually have a few projects I need to catch up on." A flicker of disappointment crossed his face so quickly I almost believed I had imagined it. He smiled anyway and nodded. "Well, do not work too hard." I drove away telling myself I had made the right decision, but when I glanced into the rearview mirror, I saw Liam still standing on the porch watching my car disappear around the corner, and for the first time since he came home, the distance between us felt much greater than the few miles separating our houses. Keeping my distance turned out to be much harder than making the decision. The first few days felt strangely quiet. I buried myself in client projects, spent long hours refining logo concepts, and convinced myself that staying busy was the healthiest choice. Every time my phone buzzed, I instinctively hoped it was Noah asking me to come over, and every time it was someone else, I felt an unexpected disappointment that I immediately tried to ignore. Then, on Wednesday afternoon, Noah finally called. His voice sounded unusually tired. His father had slipped while carrying lumber into the garage, twisting his ankle badly enough that the doctor insisted he stay off his feet for at least a couple of weeks. It was nothing serious, but it meant the backyard renovation had to stop, and Liam suddenly had far more responsibility than he had planned. Before I even realized what I was doing, I heard myself saying, "I will be there in 20 minutes. When I pulled into the driveway, the atmosphere felt different. The usual laughter had been replaced by quiet determination. Liam was unloading bags of mulch from the back of his vehicle while his mother carried grocery bags inside. Without saying much, I grabbed 2 bags before he could reach them. He looked up in surprise, and for the first time in several days, our eyes met. A genuine smile spread across his face. "I was beginning to think you had forgotten where we lived," he said lightly. I smiled back, relieved that the awkward distance I had imagined did not seem to exist on his side. I figured somebody had to keep Noah from pretending to work. Liam laughed, and the familiar warmth between us returned almost instantly. Over the next week, helping the Brooks family became part of my routine. Since Liam was balancing home repairs, caring for his father, and taking remote meetings with his architecture firm, there was always something that needed another pair of hands. I drove his mother to the garden center, picked up supplies from the hardware store, helped Noah mow the lawn, and organized tools in the garage so Liam could find everything quickly. None of it felt like an obligation. It simply felt natural. One evening, after finishing another long day of work, Liam and I sat on the back deck while the sun slowly disappeared behind the trees. His parents had already gone inside, and Noah was upstairs on a video call with friends. For several peaceful minutes, neither of us spoke. We simply listened to the evening breeze rustling through the leaves. Finally, Liam broke the silence. "Thank you," he said quietly. I looked at him, confused. "For what?" "For showing up." He rested his elbows on his knees and stared across the backyard. "When I came home, I thought I was only staying for a week or 2. I did not expect Dad to get hurt. I did not expect work to become this busy. Honestly, I have been feeling like I have been trying to keep everything together at once." His voice remained calm, but I could hear the exhaustion beneath it. "You made things easier, whether you realize it or not." I shook my head. "Anyone would have helped." He looked at me with an expression that was both thoughtful and sincere. "Maybe, but you did." Those 3 words settled somewhere deep inside me. They were simple, yet they carried a weight I could not explain. As the porch lights flickered on automatically, Liam leaned back in his chair and smiled. "You know," he said, "I forgot how much I missed this town." He glanced toward me before adding in a quieter voice, "Or maybe I just forgot how much I missed the people in it." My heart skipped again, and although I reminded myself that he could have meant his family, his neighbors, or all of us together, I could not ignore the way his eyes lingered on mine just a moment longer than necessary before he looked away toward the fading summer sky. The following Monday began like every other summer morning, bright skies stretching across town without a single cloud in sight. But by late afternoon, everything had changed. Dark gray clouds rolled over the hills with surprising speed, and the familiar warmth gave way to cool wind that bent the tree branches across the Brooks family's backyard. Liam glanced toward the sky while gathering tools from the deck. We should get everything inside before the storm reaches us, he said. Noah had already left to pick up prescription medication for his father, and Mrs. Brooks was visiting a neighbor across the street, leaving just the two of us to secure the backyard. We stacked lumber inside the garage, folded patio chairs, and covered the new flower beds with protective tarps. The first raindrops landed just as we finished moving the last toolbox indoors. Within minutes, the rain became so heavy that the backyard disappeared behind a curtain of water. Thunder rumbled in the distance while rain hammered against the garage roof. "Looks like you were stuck here for a while," Liam said with a smile. I checked my phone. A weather alert warned drivers to avoid the roads until the storm passed. "I guess I am," I answered. We carried 2 folding chairs to the open garage door and watched the rain together. The neighborhood looked completely different beneath the downpour. Streets that had been filled with bicycles and children only an hour earlier now sat empty, except for streams of water rushing toward the storm drains. The silence between us never felt uncomfortable. Somehow it had become one of my favorite parts of being around Liam. He never seemed to need constant conversation to fill every moment. After several quiet minutes, he spoke without taking his eyes off the rain. "Seattle gets storms like this all the time." I smiled. "Do you miss it?" He took longer than usual to answer. "I miss parts of it. The projects, some friends, the restaurants." He paused before quietly adding, "But I do not miss feeling like every day was only about work." He leaned back in his chair and let out a slow breath. Coming home reminded me that I built a career, but somewhere along the way I forgot to build much of a life. His honesty caught me off guard. I had always imagined adulthood meant having everything figured out. Listening to Liam, I realized even someone I admired carried doubts of his own. "You always seemed so confident," I admitted. He laughed softly. "Confidence is usually just practice. Most people are making it up as they go." We both laughed, and the tension dissolved again. A flash of lightning illuminated the driveway for an instant before fading back into gray. Almost instinctively, I glanced toward Liam at the exact moment he looked at me. Neither of us looked away. His expression softened into something quieter than friendship, something thoughtful that I could not quite name. My heartbeat grew louder than the rain outside. For one impossible moment it felt as though the entire world had narrowed to the few feet separating our chairs. Liam slowly opened his mouth as if he wanted to say something important. Instead, he looked down with a faint smile and rubbed the back of his neck. "There is something I have been thinking about," he said carefully, "but I am not sure this is the right time." Before I could respond, Noah's truck pulled into the driveway, spraying water across the pavement as he hurried toward the garage carrying a pharmacy bag over his head. The moment disappeared as naturally as it had arrived. Conversation shifted to medicine, dinner plans, and whether the storm would last through the night. Yet even while everyone talked around me, I could not stop replaying the unfinished sentence in my mind. Whatever Liam had almost said remained suspended between us like the rain clouds overhead, waiting for the moment when neither of us would be able to pretend it no longer existed. The days after the storm carried a quiet tension that neither Liam nor I seemed willing to acknowledge. Nothing had changed on the surface. We still shared coffee on the porch some mornings, still laughed whenever Noah complained about helping with yard work, and still found ourselves talking long after everyone else had wandered inside. Yet every conversation felt as though it was circling around something neither of us had found the courage to name. I caught myself wondering what Liam had almost said in the garage, replaying the unfinished sentence so many times that I began inventing answers he had never actually spoken. By the following weekend, the backyard renovation was nearly complete. Liam's father insisted on hosting a small barbecue to thank everyone who had helped. Neighbors drifted in carrying homemade desserts. Children chased one another across the lawn, and country music played softly from an old speaker on the deck. It felt like the kind of summer evening our town had always been good at creating. As the sun dipped lower, Noah asked if I could help him carry extra folding chairs from the garage. We slipped inside together, grateful for a few minutes away from the growing crowd. He stacked one chair under his arm before glancing at me with an expression I had never seen before. It was thoughtful, almost amused. "Can I ask you something?" he said. I nodded. "Sure." He hesitated for only a second. "How long have you been in love with my brother?" Every thought in my head vanished at once. I stared at him, convinced I had misheard. "What?" Noah laughed quietly and shook his head. Relax. You look like I just accused you of robbing a bank. I opened my mouth to deny everything, but no words came. My silence answered the question before I ever could. Noah rested the chairs against the wall and folded his arms. Ethan, you have been my best friend since elementary school. You think I never noticed the way you looked at Liam when we were kids? My face grew warm with embarrassment. I tried really hard to hide it. You did, Noah admitted with a grin. From everyone except the person who spent every day with you. I rubbed the back of my neck, suddenly unable to meet his eyes. I never wanted to make things awkward. You never did. He leaned against the workbench and smiled. Honestly, I always thought it was kind of sweet. I blinked in surprise. You are not upset? Noah looked genuinely confused. Why would I be upset? You are one of the best people I know. If my brother ever dated someone, I would rather it be someone kind than someone who only cared about appearances. His answer caught me completely off guard. For years I had imagined this conversation ending with anger or disappointment, never with understanding. Before I could respond, Noah added something that made my heart stop all over again. Besides, he said casually, I do not think you are the only one who has been carrying feelings around. I looked up so quickly that he laughed. What do you mean? Noah shrugged. When Liam lived in Seattle, he called home almost every Sunday. At some point, he always asked how you were doing. Not just me. You. Mom used to tease him about it after every phone call. I stood perfectly still, trying to process what I had just heard. Noah continued. When you started college, he asked if you still drew. When you got your internship, he wanted to know if you liked it. He even remembered your birthday 1 year before I did. I searched Noah's face for any sign that he was joking, but there was none. Why did nobody ever tell me? I whispered. Noah smiled gently. Because it was never my story to tell. Before either of us could say another word, Liam stepped into the garage carrying an empty cooler. He looked from Noah to me, immediately sensing that he had interrupted something important. Everything all right? He asked. Noah picked up the folding chairs with an innocent smile. Everything is finally starting to make sense. He replied before walking back toward the backyard, leaving Liam and me alone once again, surrounded by unfinished words that suddenly no longer felt impossible. For the rest of the evening, Noah's words echoed through my mind louder than the laughter drifting across the backyard. I answered questions automatically, smiled whenever someone included me in a conversation, and even helped clear empty plates after dinner, but my thoughts never stayed in one place for very long. Every memory I had collected over the past few weeks suddenly looked different. Every lingering glance, every thoughtful question, every quiet conversation on the porch carried a meaning I had never allowed myself to imagine. As twilight settled over the neighborhood, families slowly gathered their belongings and headed home. The music faded, folding chairs disappeared into the garage, and the backyard that had been full of voices only an hour earlier became peaceful again. Liam carried a tray of empty glasses into the kitchen while I instinctively followed behind to help. We washed dishes together in comfortable silence until his mother smiled at both of us and announced that she was finally going to bed. Within minutes, the house grew unexpectedly quiet. Liam dried the last plate before setting the towel aside. Would you like to take a walk? He asked. My heart immediately answered yes, even before my voice did. We wandered through the familiar streets where we had both grown up. Porch lights glowed softly beneath the warm summer sky, and somewhere in the distance a sprinkler clicked steadily across a front lawn. Neither of us seemed to be in any hurry to reach a destination. Eventually, we stopped at the small neighborhood park where Noah and I had spent countless afternoons as children. The old wooden bench beside the baseball field was still there, worn smooth by years of use. Liam sat down first, looking across the empty field with a thoughtful expression. Do you remember this place? He asked. I smiled. I practically lived here every summer. He nodded slowly. I remember looking over from baseball practice and seeing you drawing in that little notebook of yours. I laughed softly. I thought nobody noticed. He turned toward me with a gentle smile. I noticed more than you think. The quiet honesty in his voice made it impossible to look away. After a long pause, he took a slow breath. There is something I should have said a long time ago. My pulse quickened. Liam looked down at his hands for a moment before continuing. When I moved to Seattle, I kept telling myself that leaving was the right decision. I had school, work, goals, everything I thought I wanted. But every time I called home, I asked about you. He smiled to himself. At first I told myself it was because you were Noah's best friend. Then I realized that explanation stopped making sense years earlier. I listened without speaking, afraid that even a single word might interrupt the moment. Whenever Mom mentioned your artwork or your classes, I felt strangely proud. He continued. When she said you were doing well, my entire week seemed lighter. I never understood why until much later. His eyes finally met mine again. Coming home made me realize I never actually left all of my heart in Seattle. I felt every carefully built wall inside me disappear at once. I spent years trying to convince myself that what I felt when I was younger would eventually disappear, I admitted quietly. Instead, seeing you again only reminded me that it never really did. Liam smiled with unmistakable relief. I was worried I had imagined everything. I shook my head. You did not. For several peaceful seconds, we simply looked at each other, both smiling in the quiet certainty that came from finally telling the truth. Liam reached over and gently took my hand, giving me every chance to pull away if I wanted to. I did not. Instead, I returned the gesture with a small smile of my own, feeling the last 8 years quietly fall away beneath the warm summer night. In that simple moment, without grand speeches or dramatic promises, we both understood that the future no longer felt like something we had to face alone. The rest of the summer passed with a quiet kind of happiness that neither of us felt the need to rush. There were no dramatic announcements and no elaborate plans, only countless ordinary moments that slowly became the foundation of something lasting. We spent early mornings walking through the neighborhood before the streets filled with traffic, afternoons finishing the final touches on the Brooks family's backyard, and evenings talking on the porch long after the sun disappeared behind the trees. No one noticed the difference immediately, although he never teased either of us more than necessary. Every now and then he would glance in our direction with a satisfied grin and quietly excuse himself to help his mother inside, giving us a few extra minutes alone without making it obvious. Even Liam's parents seemed to understand that something meaningful had changed. They welcomed me with the same warmth they always had, but now there was a quiet knowing behind every smile that made me feel even more at home. As August approached, Liam received a call from his architecture firm in Seattle. They wanted him back for a major project that would begin in just a few weeks. Months earlier, I knew he would have accepted without hesitation. This time, he simply thanked them for the opportunity and asked for a few days to think. We sat together beneath the finished pergola that evening, surrounded by flowers we had planted ourselves. I spent years believing success meant never looking back, Liam admitted. Now I think success also means knowing where you truly belong. A few days later, he accepted a new position with a regional architecture company less than an hour from our hometown. It was a smaller role than the one he had left behind, but it gave him something he had been missing for years, a chance to build both a career and a life in the same place. His decision inspired me to stop waiting for the perfect opportunity as well. Instead of continuing to postpone my dream, I rented a modest office space downtown and began turning it into a small creative design studio. Liam volunteered every free weekend to help renovate the space. We painted walls, assembled furniture, installed shelving, and laughed whenever our measurements did not quite match the original plans. By the time autumn arrived, the studio finally opened its doors. The first framed illustration hanging near the entrance was not part of any client project. It was an updated version of the old pencil sketch I had hidden inside my closet for years, except this time the front porch was no longer empty. Two figures stood together beneath the evening light, looking toward whatever came next. Nearly a year after Liam returned home, the Brooks family hosted another backyard barbecue to celebrate his father's full recovery and the completion of every renovation project we had started together. Friends filled the yard once again, children laughed across the grass, and the smell of grilled burgers drifted through the warm evening air exactly as it had on the day everything quietly began. I looked around and realized that the backyard itself had become a reminder of our journey. The weathered fence had been restored, the garden had grown, and the pergola that once existed only as a sketch now stood covered with climbing flowers. Liam gently slipped his hand into mine beneath the table, unnoticed by everyone except Noah, who caught the moment from across the yard. He raised his glass with an amused smile before returning to his conversation, as though silently reminding us that some stories reach their happiest ending not because they happened quickly, but because they happened at exactly the right time. Looking back, I finally understood that my greatest mistake had never been falling in love with my best friend's older brother. My greatest mistake had been believing that some feelings were meant to stay locked inside the past. Sometimes life gives you a second chance disguised as an ordinary summer afternoon. Sometimes home is not simply the place where you grew up. Sometimes home is the person who quietly remembers you even after years apart, waits without asking for anything in return, and chooses to build a future beside you one ordinary day at a time.